Hey, Noah, your smile's brighter than any song I know, Sarah Delgado whispered, her voice soft as she strummed her guitar, coaxing a giggle from the autistic boy who hadn't laughed in years. Her sneakers scuffed the grass in the Whitaker Estate's garden, her heart pounding with a hope she hadn't felt since her mother's lullabies. What Sarah didn't know was that this moment would unravel a billionaire's guarded world, exposing a web of betrayal that threatened her family and Noah's future. A janitor's daughter, dismissed as a nobody, would become the heart of a fight for justice, forging a family from pain and truth. If this stirs your soul, hit that subscribe button and share where you're watching from. Chicago, midnight, or beyond. Stick around. Sarah's courage and Noah's laugh will reveal a truth that changes everything. You're nothing but a leech sniffing around my son. Helen Carver's voice sliced through the air like a blade, her manicured finger jabbing toward Sarah Delgado's chest. The garden behind Daniel Whitaker's Chicago mansion stood still, the only sound Noah's soft giggle fading as Sarah froze, her guitar still slung across her shoulder. Moments ago, she'd been strumming a gentle melody, coaxing a laugh from Noah, the 8-year-old autistic boy who hadn't smiled in years. Now Helen, the estate manager, loomed over her, eyes narrowed with venom. I saw you cozying up to that boy. You think you can worm your way into this family's money? Sarah's jaw clenched, her knuckles whitening around the guitar strap. I was just playing for him. He was happy. Her voice stayed steady, but her pulse hammered in her throat. She glanced at Noah, now rocking slightly on the grass, his small hands clutching a daisy she'd given him. Daniel Whitaker stood a few feet away, his tailored suit crisp, his face unreadable. He'd seen it all, Sarah's music, Noah's laugh, and now Helen's accusation. Happy? Helen spat, cutting her off. You're not here to play nanny. Your father mops floors and you're just his shadow. Don't get ideas above your station. Her words dripped with disdain, each one a calculated strike at Sarah's roots. Her Mexican heritage, her father's job, her place in this world of wealth. Sarah's chest tightened, but she held her ground, her sneakers rooted to the earth. Daniel stepped forward, his voice low but sharp. Helen, enough. She's not on trial. But Helen wheeled on him, her blonde bob swinging. Oh, please, Daniel. You're blind if you think this girl's here for anything but a paycheck. I've seen her kind before, latching on to vulnerable kids like Noah to climb the ladder. She turned back to Sarah, her smile cold. Pack your things. You're done here, and tell your father his services are under review. Sarah's breath caught, her teeth grinding so hard her jaw ached. She thought of her father, Juan, scrubbing floors at dawn to pay for her college textbooks. Losing this job would crush him, but it was Noah's wide, uncertain eyes that hit her hardest. She'd only wanted to ease his panic, to bring a moment of joy to a boy trapped in silence. Now Helen's words twisted that act into something dirty, something shameful. You're wrong, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension like a taut wire. I don't want your money. I saw a kid who needed someone, and I showed up. That's it. Her eyes locked on Helen's, unflinching, but inside her heart pounded like a drum. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for Noah, for her father, for every time she'd been looked down on because of who she was. Helen scoffed, crossing her arms. Spare me the saint act. You're out, and if you push this, I'll make sure the whole estate board knows what you're after. She turned to Daniel. You're too soft, Whitaker. Let me handle this, or you'll regret it. Daniel's fingers twitched, his face a mask of conflict. He opened his mouth, but Helen cut him off again. Do you want a scandal? Because that's what she'll bring. Sarah's hands trembled as she slung her guitar over her back. She knelt beside Noah, her voice soft. I'll be back, okay? You're not alone. Noah's fingers tightened around the daisy, his rocking slowing just a fraction. She stood, facing Helen one last time. You can kick me out, but you can't erase what I did for him. Her words hung heavy, a challenge unspoken. Helen smirked, but Daniel's eyes lingered on Sarah, something flickering in his gaze. Doubt, maybe guilt. As Sarah walked away, her sneakers crunching on the gravel path, Noah's faint whimper followed her, a sound that cut deeper than Helen's words. The mansion's shadow loomed behind her, cold and unyielding, but something burned in her chest, a spark of defiance that wouldn't fade. Sarah Delgado's sneakers scuffed the gravel as she strode away from the Whitaker mansion, her guitar case bouncing against her hip. Helen Carver's venomous words still burned in her ears. "You're just his shadow. Don't get ideas above your station." Her chest felt like it was caving in, but her spine stayed straight, each step a deliberate act of defiance. She wouldn't let Helen see her crack. Not now, not ever. Noah's faint whimper echoed in her mind, his small hand clutching that daisy as she left him in the garden. That image fueled her, kept her from crumbling under the weight of Helen's accusations. She reached the estate's iron gates, where her father Juan waited in his faded work truck. His calloused hands gripped the steering wheel, his eyes searching her face as she climbed in. "Mija, what happened?" His voice was soft, laced with worry. Sarah's throat tightened, but she forced her lips into a tight line, refusing to let tears spill. "They think I'm after their money," she said, her voice low, sharp like a blade. "Helen Carver told Mr. Whitaker, I'm using Noah to get to him. She wants you fired too." Juan's face hardened, his knuckles whitening. "Fired? For what? I've scrubbed their floors for 10 years. His voice cracked, not with fear, but with the kind of anger that comes from being stepped on too long. Sarah placed a hand on his arm, her touch steady despite the storm inside her. "It's not your fault, Papa. It's her. She's got something against us, and I don't know why." Her words came out firm, but her heart pounded, thinking of Noah's laugh. So rare, so fragile, now at risk, because of Helen's cruelty. The truck rumbled down the road, Chicago's skyline looming in the distance. Sarah stared out the window, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. She saw her reflection in the glass, braids fraying, eyes burning with resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for her father, who'd come to America with nothing but a dream for her. For Noah, who'd smiled for the first time in years because of her. For every time someone had looked at her and seen only a janitor's daughter, not a woman with a heart that could move mountains. "I'm not done," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the hum of the engine. Juan glanced at her, brow furrowed. "What do you mean, Mija?" Sarah turned to him, her eyes fierce. "I'm not letting her win. Noah needs someone who sees him, not just his condition. I'm not walking away from that boy." Her words weren't loud, but they carried a weight that filled the cab, a promise etched in steel. Juan nodded slowly, pride flickering in his tired eyes. "You're your mother's daughter," he said, voice thick. "She never backed down either." Sarah's fingers tightened around her guitar case, the worn leather grounding her. She thought of her mother, Maria, who'd sung lullabies to her in a hospital bed, her voice weak but unbroken. That strength lived in Sarah now, a fire Helen couldn't snuff out. She wouldn't beg for her place in that mansion, wouldn't grovel for a job or a chance. But she'd fight for Noah, for the spark she'd seen in his eyes when her music reached him. "They can't erase what I did," she said, more to herself than to Juan. "I made him laugh. That's real." As the truck pulled into their modest apartment complex, Sarah's resolve hardened. She stepped out, the evening air sharp against her skin. Her father's hand rested briefly on her shoulder, a silent vow of support. She looked back toward the direction of the mansion, hidden miles away behind wealth and walls. Helen's smirk flashed in her mind, but so did Noah's daisy, his giggle, his trust. Sarah's lips pressed into a determined line. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Somewhere in that cold estate, a boy was waiting, and she'd find a way back to him. Daniel Whitaker stood in his office, the glass walls reflecting the Chicago skyline, but his eyes were glued to the security monitor. The grainy footage looped, Sarah Delgado, guitar in hand, strumming softly in the garden as Noah's face broke into a smile, his small hands clapping once, twice before clutching a daisy. That laugh, high, pure, impossible, pierced Daniel's chest like a dart. He hadn't heard it since Emma died 3 years ago. His fingers froze on the mouse, his tie suddenly too tight, his pulse thudding in his ears. Helen's words echoed, "She's after your money." But this footage told a different story, one that made his stomach twist. He rewound the video, watching again. Sarah's hands moved gently, her voice low, singing something he couldn't quite hear. Noah's rocking slowed, his eyes locked on her, not with fear but with something Daniel hadn't seen in years: trust. His son, who flinched at strangers, who screamed through therapy sessions, had laughed. Daniel's jaw tightened, his teeth grinding. Had he been wrong to let Helen throw her out? The thought clawed at him, sharp and unrelenting. He paced to the window, his polished shoes clicking on the hardwood. Helen's accusation had been so certain, so vicious, and he'd stood there silent, letting Sarah walk away. His fists clenched, nails digging into his palms. He'd built a tech empire by trusting his gut, but this time he trusted the wrong person. The memory of Sarah's words cut deeper. "You can't erase what I did for him." She hadn't begged, hadn't flinched. She'd stood tall, her eyes burning with a fire he couldn't ignore. Daniel returned to his desk, his hands shaking as he opened a drawer. Inside was a small wooden box, one Emma had carved herself, filled with Noah's keepsakes. He lifted the lid, his breath catching. A folded note lay on top, Emma's handwriting curling across the page. "Find someone who sings to his heart, Daniel. That's who Noah needs." His throat burned, the words blurring as he read them again. Emma had known Noah better than anyone, had spent hours with him, signing, playing, loving him through his silence. Had she been talking about someone like Sarah? He slammed the box shut, his heart pounding. The note wasn't proof, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Sarah wasn't just a janitor's daughter. She'd reached Noah in a way no therapist ever had. Daniel's fingers hovered over his phone, tempted to call Helen to demand answers. But something stopped him. Helen's smirk, her quickness to judge, her insistence on control. It didn't add up. Why was she so hell-bent on keeping Sarah away? He glanced back at the monitor, frozen on Sarah's face, calm and focused as she sang to Noah. His son's smile lingered in the frame, a fleeting moment of joy Daniel had almost let slip away. His chest ached, a mix of guilt and something sharper: regret. He'd been too quick to dismiss her, too ready to believe Helen's venom. Now, Noah's laugh was gone again, and the silence in the mansion felt heavier than ever. Daniel grabbed his coat, his movements sharp and decisive. He needed to find Sarah, to see her face, to know if that note meant what he thought it did. His shoes echoed as he strode toward the door, the weight of his mistake pressing down on him. Noah's daisy lay on the desk, a fragile reminder of what he'd let Helen destroy. He wouldn't let it happen again. Outside, the city lights flickered, but all Daniel saw was that garden, that laugh, and a young woman who'd walked away with more dignity than he'd ever mustered. Something was stirring in him, a need to make this right, to chase a truth he hadn't yet grasped. "You let her walk away, and now my son's back to silence." Daniel Whitaker's voice cracked like a whip as he slammed his phone down, his assistant flinching on the other end of the line. He stood in his sleek Chicago office, the security footage of Sarah Delgado and Noah frozen on his monitor. Her guitar, his son's laugh, that daisy still haunting him. Guilt gnawed at his gut, sharper than any boardroom loss. He'd let Helen Carver's venom cloud his judgment, and now Noah was retreating again, rocking in his room, no smile, no sound. Daniel's fists clenched, his nails biting into his palms. He had to fix this. He grabbed his keys, his polished shoes pounding the marble floor as he left the mansion. The address from Sarah's employee file burned in his mind, a modest apartment complex in a working-class Chicago neighborhood. His Bentley felt out of place as he pulled into the cracked parking lot, the hum of the engine drawing stares from kids kicking a soccer ball nearby. Daniel stepped out, his tie loosened, his jaw tight. He wasn't here to play savior. He needed answers, needed to know why Sarah's music had reached Noah when nothing else had. At the apartment door, he knocked, his knuckles sharp against the chipped wood. Juan Delgado answered, his work-worn face hardening at the sight of Daniel. "Mr. Whitaker," Juan said, his voice cold, arms crossed. "What do you want?" Daniel's throat tightened, but he forced the words out. "I need to see Sarah. I made a mistake." Juan's eyes narrowed, his stance unyielding. "You think you can just show up after what happened? My daughter's not your pawn. Before Daniel could respond, Sarah appeared behind her father, her braids pulled back, her eyes blazing. Let him talk, Papa, she said, her voice low but firm. She stepped forward, her sneakers scuffing the threshold. What do you want, Mr. Whitaker? Another chance to call me a gold digger? Her words cut, each one a precise jab. Daniel's chest tightened, the memory of Helen's accusations flashing through his mind. He raised a hand, not to silence her, but to plead. I was wrong. I saw the footage. You made Noah laugh. No one's done that since Emma. Sarah's jaw clenched, her fingers curling into fists. And you let that woman throw me out. You think an apology fixes that? Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of pain. Daniel took a step closer, his voice dropping. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking you to come back. Noah needs you. Sarah's lips parted, but she didn't speak. Juan stepped between them, his voice sharp. She's not your servant. You don't get to snap your fingers and expect her to run back. Daniel's hands shook, his usual control slipping. He thought of Emma's note. Find someone who sings to his heart. And Noah's daisy, now wilting on his desk. I know I don't deserve it, he said, his voice raw. But Noah doesn't deserve to lose you? Please. Sarah studied him, her gaze piercing. She saw the cracks in his polished exterior, the shadows under his eyes, the way his fingers twitched. He wasn't the untouchable billionaire now, just a father desperate for his son. She turned to Juan, her voice softer. Papa, let me handle this. Juan hesitated, then stepped back, his eyes still locked on Daniel. Sarah faced Daniel again, her chin high. I'll think about it, but not for you, for Noah. She shut the door, the sound sharp, final. Daniel stood there, his breath shallow, the weight of his mistake heavier than ever. He'd seen Sarah's world, her small apartment, her father's calloused hands, her fierce loyalty, and it shamed him. He'd judged her as Helen had, through a lens of wealth and suspicion. Now he saw her strength, her fire, and it burned him. As he drove back to the mansion, Noah's face filled his mind. Not the boy rocking in panic, but the one laughing under Sarah's spell. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He'd find a way to bring her back, not just for Noah, but to right the wrong he'd let happen. The city blurred past, but all he saw was Sarah's defiant eyes, and in his pocket, Emma's note felt heavier, a quiet accusation he couldn't ignore. Sarah Delgado's fingers danced across the guitar strings, the notes sharp and soulful, filling the cramped community center in Chicago's West Side. The room buzzed with kids, some in wheelchairs, others rocking gently, their eyes fixed on her. She knelt beside a boy named Miguel, his hands trembling as he tried to mimic her strumming. Like this, she said, her voice soft but steady, guiding his fingers to the right chord. His face lit up, a shy smile breaking through. Sarah's chest swelled, her jaw tight with quiet pride. This was her world, not the cold marble of Whitaker's mansion, but a place where broken strings and bruised hearts could still make music. She wore a faded denim jacket, her braids tucked behind her ears, her sneakers scuffed from the walk over. The center's fluorescent lights buzzed, but Sarah didn't notice. She saw only the kids, each one a reminder of her mother, Maria, who taught her to play guitar through pain and hospital stays. Music speaks when words can't, her mother used to say. Sarah lived by that, pouring her grief into every note, every lesson. She wasn't here for glory, she was here because these kids, like Noah, needed someone who saw them. Miss Sarah, play the train song, a girl called out, her voice high and eager. Sarah grinned, her fingers shifting to a lively melody. The kids clapped, some offbeat, others signing along with clumsy hands. She caught Miguel's eye, nodding as he tapped his foot, his usual silence giving way to rhythm. Her heart thudded, not with anger over Helen's cruelty, but with purpose. She'd been called a gold digger, a nobody, but here, she was everything to these kids. Her teeth clenched at the memory of Helen's sneer, but she pushed it down, focusing on the music. Across the room, her friend Rosa leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching. You're wasting your gift on that rich guy's kid, Rosa said, her voice low but sharp. Sarah's fingers paused, the notes fading. I'm not wasting anything, she shot back, her eyes fierce. Noah laughed, Rosa. You don't know what that means. Rosa raised a brow but didn't push. Sarah's gaze softened as she looked at the kids. They're not broken. They just need someone to listen. Her words carried weight, echoing her own fight against Helen, against a world that saw her as less. She stood, slinging her guitar over her shoulder, and helped Miguel pack his things. His small hand brushed hers, a thank you without words. Sarah's throat tightened, thinking of Noah's Daisy, his giggle. She'd walked away from Whitaker's mansion, but not from him. Her resolve hardened, her nails digging into her palms. She wasn't done fighting, not for Noah, not for kids like Miguel. She'd prove Helen wrong, not with words but with action. As she stepped outside, the evening air hit her face, sharp and cool. Rosa followed, tossing her a water bottle. You're going to go back, aren't you? Rosa asked, her tone half challenging. Sarah didn't answer right away, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the city lights blurred. She thought of her mother's guitar, her father's calloused hands, Noah's fragile trust. If I do, she said finally, her voice like steel, it's on my terms. Her sneakers crunched on the pavement, each step a promise to keep singing, no matter who tried to silence her. Get out of my way, Whitaker, or I'll make sure you regret it. Helen Carver's voice hissed through the phone, her words sharp enough to cut glass. Daniel Whitaker stood outside the Chicago Community Center, his coat flapping in the evening wind, his knuckles white around his phone. He'd tracked Sarah Delgado here after seeing her name on a volunteer roster, driven by the memory of Noah's laugh and Emma's note burning in his pocket. Helen's call had come just as he spotted Sarah through the center's window, strumming her guitar for a group of kids. You're digging your own grave, chasing that girl, Helen snapped. She's trouble. Daniel's jaw clenched, his teeth grinding. You don't get to decide who's trouble. He shot back, his voice low, lethal. I saw what she did for Noah. You lied. Helen laughed, cold and sharp. You're soft, Daniel. Always were. Keep this up, and the estate board will hear about your little charity case. He hung up, his pulse hammering, her threat lingering like a blade at his throat. He shoved the phone into his pocket and pushed through the center's doors, his polished shoes out of place on the scuffed linoleum. Inside, Sarah was packing her guitar, her movements quick, deliberate. The kids had gone, leaving only the echo of their laughter. She froze when she saw him, her eyes narrowing, her fingers tightening on the guitar case. You again, she said, her voice like a taut wire. What now? Another apology? Her words stung, but Daniel didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his hands raised, palms open. I was wrong, Sarah. I let Helen push you out. I'm here to make it right. Sarah's lips pressed into a hard line, her nails digging into the leather strap of her case. Right? You think words fix what happened? My dad's job is on the line because of you. Her voice was steady, but her eyes blazed, a fire Daniel couldn't look away from. He took a breath, his chest tight. I know. That's why I'm here. Noah hasn't stopped rocking since you left. I need you back. Not for me, for him. Sarah's gaze flickered, softening for a split second at Noah's name, but her stance didn't waver. I'll come back, she said finally, her voice sharp, but not as your servant. You learn to see Noah, really see him. No more hiding behind money or managers. And Helen stays out of my way. Her conditions landed like punches, each one precise. Daniel nodded, his throat tight. Done. You have my word. Sarah studied him, her eyes searching for a lie. She found none, but her guard stayed up, her shoulders squared. As she turned to grab her bag, a small box on the table caught her eye. Noah's, left behind from a therapy session she'd attended weeks ago. She opened it, her fingers trembling. Inside was a photo of Emma, Noah's mother, strumming a guitar, her smile radiant. Tucked beside it was a note in Emma's handwriting. Helen never understood Noah. Keep her away from him. Sarah's breath caught, her pulse racing. She handed the note to Daniel, her eyes fierce. What's this? Daniel's face paled as he read it, his fingers gripping the paper. Emma wrote this before she died, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know. Sarah's jaw tightened, her mind racing. Helen's venom wasn't just prejudice, it was personal. She's hiding something, Sarah said, her voice like steel. And I'm not letting her hurt Noah again. Daniel met her gaze, his own resolve hardening. Neither am I. Sarah slung her guitar over her shoulder, her sneakers scuffing the floor as she headed for the door. Daniel followed, the note clutched in his hand, a silent vow between them. Outside, the city lights flickered, but all Sarah saw was Noah's face, his Daisy, his trust. Something bigger was at play, and she was ready to fight for the truth, no matter what it cost. You think you can just waltz back into this estate and play hero? Helen Carver's voice was a venomous hiss, her heels clicking sharply as she cornered Sarah Delgado in the mansion's staff corridor. Sarah froze, her guitar case slung over her shoulder, her pulse hammering in her throat. She'd returned to the Whitaker estate that morning, her conditions to Daniel clear. No interference, no control. But Helen's eyes glinted with malice, her blonde bob swinging as she leaned in close. You're a nobody, Sarah. And now you've got Daniel wrapped around your finger. Pathetic. Sarah's jaw clenched, her fingers tightening on the strap until her knuckles ached. She'd come back for Noah, not for this. I'm here for the kid, she said, her voice low, cutting. Not for you. Helen's lips curled into a sneer, her arms crossing. Oh, please. You're after his money, just like every other opportunist. And I'm not the only one who sees it. She stepped back, gesturing toward a man in a sleek suit emerging from the shadows. Richard Voss, a real estate mogul with a smile as cold as steel. Meet Mr. Voss. He's very interested in your influence over Daniel. Voss's eyes raked over Sarah, his voice smooth but laced with threat. Miss Delgado, you're causing quite a stir. My investors don't like uncertainty, especially when it involves Whitaker's estate. His words landed like a punch, implying power far beyond Helen's reach. Sarah's stomach twisted, but her chin lifted, her eyes locked on his. I don't care about your investors. I care about Noah. Voss chuckled, a sound that made her skin crawl. Bold, but naive. Stay out of our way, or your father's job and your little community college dreams will vanish. Sarah's teeth ground together, her nails digging into her palms. She thought of Juan scrubbing floors at dawn, and Noah, whose laugh she'd fought to bring back. This wasn't just about her anymore. Helen stepped closer, her voice a whisper. You don't belong here. And Richard, he makes problems disappear. She turned, her heels clicking away, Voss following with a smirk. Sarah's chest heaved, her breath shallow. They weren't just after her. They were after Daniel's empire, using Noah as leverage. She stood rooted, her heart pounding like a drum. Helen's threat wasn't empty. Voss's presence screamed money and power, a network that could crush her family. But Noah's face flashed in her mind. His Daisy, his giggle, the way he'd leaned into her music. She wouldn't let them scare her off. Her fingers brushed the guitar case, grounding her. She'd come back to protect Noah, and now she saw the bigger fight. Helen and Voss weren't just bullies. They were predators, circling a grieving man and his son. Sarah turned toward Noah's room, her sneakers silent but purposeful. She needed to talk to Daniel, to warn him about Voss. Helen's note from Emma, keep her away from him, burned in her memory, a clue to something darker. Her resolve hardened, her jaw set. Whatever Helen and Voss were planning, she'd face it head on. As she reached Noah's door, his soft hum reached her ears, a fragile sound that steeled her heart. This fight was just beginning, and she wasn't backing down. You're playing with fire, Sarah, and you're gonna get burned. Helen Carver's voice echoed in Sarah Delgado's ears as she stood in Noah's room, her fingers gripping the edge of his small wooden desk. The threat from Helen and Richard Voss still stung, their words like knives aimed at her family's survival. But the note from Emma, keep her away from him, burned hotter, a warning that Helen's venom ran deeper than prejudice. Sarah's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding as she glanced at Noah, humming softly while stacking colored blocks. She wouldn't let them touch him. Not now, not ever. She slipped out of the room, her sneakers silent on the mansion's hardwood floor, and found Daniel Whitaker in his office, his face buried in a laptop. We need to talk, she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the hum of the machine. Daniel looked up, his eyes shadowed, His tie loosened. "What's wrong?" he asked, his tone tight. Sarah didn't waste a breath. "Helen's not just after me. She's working with Richard Voss. They're using Noah to get to you." Daniel's fist clenched, his knuckles whitening. "Voss? The real estate shark? What's he got to do with this?" Sarah pulled out the note from Emma, her hands steady despite her racing pulse. "This, your wife knew Helen was trouble. She wrote it before she died." Daniel's face paled as he read the words again, his fingers trembling. "Helen was Emma's friend. Why would she—" His voice trailed off, his jaw tightening. Sarah didn't let him finish. "She's not your friend. She's after something. Your money, your land, your company. And she's dragging Noah into it." Her words landed like blows, each one fueling Daniel's growing anger. He stood pacing, his shoes clicking sharply. "I'll fire her. Right now." Sarah grabbed his arm, her grip firm. "No, that's what she wants. A quick exit before we find out what she's hiding. We need proof." Her eyes blazed, her resolve like steel. Daniel nodded, his chest heaving. "You're right. But where do we start?" Sarah's lips pressed into a hard line. "Your wife's things. If she knew about Helen, there's more." They moved to the attic, a cramped space filled with boxes labeled in Emma's neat handwriting. Sarah's fingers tore through dusty files, her heart pounding as she searched for answers. Daniel rifled through a stack of old emails printed out, his hands shaking. "Here," he said, pulling out a sheet. "Emma wrote to her lawyer about a charity fund. She suspected someone was skimming money." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she read the email, her nails digging into her palms. "Helen ran that fund, didn't she?" Daniel nodded, his face grim. "She had access to everything." Sarah's mind raced, connecting dots. She grabbed her phone and called Maria, her friend from the community center, a paralegal with a knack for digging up dirt. "Maria, I need you to check something," Sarah said, her voice low, urgent. "Helen Carver, estate manager for Whitaker. Look into her financials. Anything tied to a charity fund." Maria's voice crackled through the line. "You're in deep, aren't you? Give me a day." Sarah hung up, her pulse hammering. She turned to Daniel. "We need more. Something solid." They went back to the boxes, Sarah's hands moving faster now, tearing open folders. She found a USB drive tucked inside a photo album, labeled Noah's Sessions. Her breath caught. "This could be it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel plugged it into his laptop, his fingers clumsy with urgency. The screen lit up with videos of Noah's early therapy sessions, Emma's voice narrating softly. One clip showed Emma signing to Noah, her face tense as she whispered to the camera. "Helen's pushing me to sell the estate's land. She's not who she seems." Sarah's heart stopped, her teeth grinding. "She knew," Sarah said, her voice like a blade. "Emma was on to her." Daniel's face darkened, his fists clenching. "Why didn't she tell me?" Sarah didn't answer, her eyes locked on the screen. Another file on the USB caught her attention. A spreadsheet labeled Charity Discrepancies. She opened it, her pulse racing. Numbers didn't lie. Thousands of dollars missing, funneled through shell accounts, with Helen's initials on every transfer. "This is it," Sarah said, her voice shaking with fury. "She's been stealing from you, from Noah." Daniel's breath came in sharp bursts, his eyes burning. "We confront her now." Sarah grabbed his wrist, her grip fierce. "Not yet. We need to know how deep this goes. Voss is involved, and he's not just some investor. He's got power." She thought of her father, Juan, still at risk of losing his job, and Noah, whose trust she'd fought to earn. This wasn't just about money. It was about protecting a boy who'd already lost too much. Sarah slipped the USB into her pocket, her resolve hardening. "Maria's digging. We keep quiet until we have everything." Daniel nodded, his jaw tight, his eyes flickering with something new. Trust in her. Sarah's sneakers scuffed the attic floor as she headed for the stairs, her heart pounding like a war drum. Helen and Voss thought they could scare her off, but they'd underestimated her. She'd find the truth. For Noah, for her family, for Emma's memory. As she descended, Noah's hum echoed from his room, a fragile sound that fueled her fight. The game had changed and she was ready to play. You betrayed her, Helen, and now you're after her son. Daniel Whitaker's voice roared through his office, his fist slamming the desk so hard the coffee mug rattled. Sarah Delgado stood beside him, her pulse hammering, the USB drive clutched in her hand like a loaded gun. The spreadsheet they'd found, rows of stolen funds, Helen Carver's initials on every line, had led them here, to a truth that burned hotter than anger. Helen wasn't just a thief. She'd been plotting against Emma, Noah's mother, long before her death. Sarah's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding as she stared at the laptop screen. The final piece had come from Maria's call minutes ago, her voice sharp over the phone. Helen's been funneling money through Voss's shell companies for years, Maria said. But it's worse. Emma caught her. There's an email. She threatened to expose Helen to the board. Sarah's heart pounded, her nails digging into her palms. She handed Daniel the printed email, her fingers steady despite the fury in her chest. Emma's words were clear. Helen's pushing to sell the estate's land to Voss. She's stealing from Noah's future. Daniel's face paled, his breath shallow. She was Emma's friend, he said, his voice breaking raw. She stood at her funeral, held my hand. His eyes burned, his fist trembling. Sarah stepped closer, her voice like steel. She used you. Emma found out, and Helen made sure she couldn't talk. The words landed like a blade cutting through the air. Sarah didn't say murder. She didn't need to. The implication hung heavy, a shadow over every memory Daniel held dear. The email detailed Helen's scheme, siphoning charity funds meant for Noah's therapy, funneling them to Voss's real estate deals. Emma had confronted her, demanding she stop or face legal action. Days later, Emma was gone. Her illness sudden, her death too convenient. Sarah's chest tightened, thinking of Noah, his silence, his Daisy. Helen hadn't just stolen money. She'd stolen a mother's voice, a boy's safety. She's been playing you all along, Sarah said, her voice low, fierce. And now she's using Noah to keep you in line. Daniel's hands shook, his tie askew, his polished exterior crumbling. I trusted her, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah grabbed his arm, her grip firm. We end this. For Noah. For Emma. Her eyes blazed, her resolve unshakable. Daniel nodded, his jaw tightening, a fire igniting in his gaze. They had the proof. Emails, spreadsheets, Emma's warnings. Helen's betrayal was laid bare, a wound reopened, but now ready to fight. Sarah slipped the USB into her pocket, her heart pounding like a drum. They weren't just facing a thief, they were facing a predator who'd orchestrated Emma's silence and now targeted Noah. As she turned toward Noah's room, his soft hum reached her ears, a fragile lifeline. Helen thought she'd won, but Sarah was ready to tear her world apart, one truth at a time. You're done, Delgado. You and your pathetic family are out. Helen Carver's voice sliced through the packed meeting room of the Whitaker Estates board, her manicured finger jabbing at Sarah Delgado like a dagger. The air crackled with tension, the board members' eyes darting between Helen and Sarah, who stood at the room's edge, her guitar case slung over her shoulder. She'd come to the meeting at Daniel Whitaker's insistence, clutching the USB drive with Emma's evidence, proof of Helen's theft and betrayal. But Helen struck first, her words venomous, accusing Sarah of manipulating Noah for profit. She's a leech preying on a vulnerable child, Helen spat, her blonde bob swinging as she turned to the board. I demand her removal, now! Sarah's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding so hard her jaw ached. Her pulse hammered, but she stood tall, her sneakers rooted to the floor. I'm here for Noah, she said, her voice low, cutting like a blade. You're the one stealing from him. Helen's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer. How dare you? You're nothing, a janitor's daughter with a cheap guitar. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. Keep talking, and your father's out of a job by morning. The threat landed like a punch, Sarah's nails digging into her palms as she thought of Juan, his calloused hands, his years of labor for this estate. Daniel shot to his feet, his chair scraping the floor. Enough, Helen! His voice boomed, his fists clenched, knuckles white. Sarah's not the liar here. But Helen cut him off, her tone sharp. You're blind, Daniel. She's got you fooled, just like she's fooling that boy, the board murmured, their glances heavy with doubt. Sarah's chest tightened, her breath shallow. She felt the weight of their stares, the same judgment she'd faced her whole life. Too poor, too brown, too small to matter. But Noah's face flashed in her mind, his laugh, his daisy, his trust, and her resolve hardened like steel. Before she could respond, Richard Voss rose from the back, his suit pristine, his smile cold. "Miss Delgado, you're causing trouble," he said, his voice smooth but deadly. "Walk away now, or we'll make sure you and your father regret it." His words weren't loud, but they carried a threat that made Sarah's skin crawl. She noticed a man in a dark jacket lingering near the door, his eyes fixed on her, his hand resting on something under his coat. Her heart pounded, her fingers tightening on the USB in her pocket. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a trap. "Back off," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing her gut. She locked eyes with Voss, refusing to flinch. "I've got proof you and Helen stole from Noah's future. You're not scaring me." Helen laughed, sharp and cruel. "Proof? You're delusional." But Sarah saw the flicker of panic in her eyes, the way her hands twitched. Voss stepped closer, his voice low. "Careful, girl. You don't know who you're messing with." The man by the door shifted, his hand moving slightly, and Sarah's pulse spiked. She was cornered, outnumbered, her family's livelihood on the line. Daniel stepped between them, his frame rigid, his eyes burning. "Touch her, and you'll answer to me," he said, his voice a growl. Sarah's breath caught, but she didn't back down. She held up the USB, her hand steady. "This ends tonight," she said, her voice like a blade. The room went silent, the board's eyes wide, the air thick with anticipation. Sarah's heart thundered, but her gaze never wavered. She thought of Noah's hum, her mother's guitar, her father's pride. Helen and Voss thought they could break her, but they'd underestimated her fight. As the man by the door took a step forward, Sarah braced herself, ready for whatever came next. "You're finished, Sarah! That USB proves nothing." Helen Carver's voice screeched across the meeting room, her face twisted with fury as Sarah Delgado clutched the evidence tighter, her heart pounding like a war drum. The board members' eyes darted between them, the air thick with tension after Sarah's bold stand against Helen and Richard Voss. The man in the dark jacket by the door had stepped back, but his presence lingered like a shadow, his hand still hovering near his coat. Sarah's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding as she faced Helen's sneer. She'd called their bluff, but the danger was real. Her father's job, her family's future, Noah's safety, all balanced on the edge of a knife. Sarah slipped the USB into her pocket, her fingers trembling, but her resolve like steel. "You're wrong," she said, her voice low, cutting. "This proves everything." She turned to Daniel Whitaker, his face pale but his eyes burning with a fire she hadn't seen before. "We need to move," she whispered, her pulse racing. Daniel nodded, his jaw tight, and grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the exit. "Not here," he said, his voice a growl. "They're watching." The board murmured, Voss's cold smile following them as they pushed through the door, the man in the jacket trailing at a distance. Outside, Sarah's sneakers hit the gravel path, her breath shallow as they ducked into Daniel's Bentley. "Drive," she said, her voice sharp. Daniel floored it, the engine roaring as they sped away from the estate. Sarah's mind raced, replaying the spreadsheet, Emma's email, the video of her warning about Helen. They had proof, but it wasn't enough, not to take down Voss's network. "We need something undeniable," she said, her nails digging into her palms. "Something they can't bury." Daniel's knuckles whitened on the wheel. "Like what?" "Maria," Sarah said, pulling out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. Her friend, the paralegal from the community center, answered on the first ring. "Sarah, you okay?" Maria's voice was tense. "I got your text about Voss. It's bad." Sarah's heart skipped. "What did you find?" Maria's voice dropped. "Helen's been wiring money to an offshore account tied to Voss. But there's more. A voice recording from Emma's lawyer. She sent it before she died. It's on a secure server. I'm sending you the access code now." Sarah's breath caught, her chest tightening. "Send it fast." The car screeched to a stop outside a diner near the community center, the neon sign buzzing faintly. Sarah and Daniel ducked inside, sliding into a corner booth. She opened her laptop, her hands shaking as she logged into Maria's server. Daniel leaned in, his shoulder brushing hers, his face grim. "If this is what I think it is," he started, but Sarah cut him off. "It is." The file loaded. A grainy audio clip, Emma's voice clear despite the static. "Helen's stealing from the charity," Emma said, her tone urgent. "She's working with Voss to sell the estate's land. If anything happens to me, don't let her near Noah." The recording cut off, Emma's last words echoing like a gunshot. Sarah's teeth ground together, her fury boiling over. "She knew Helen would come for Noah," she said, her voice like a blade. Daniel's fists clenched, his eyes blazing. "She trusted me to protect him, and I failed." Sarah grabbed his wrist, her grip fierce. "You're not failing now. We've got this." She downloaded the recording, her heart pounding. It was the final nail, proof not just of theft, but of a conspiracy that cost Emma her peace, maybe her life. Maria's text buzzed through. "Be careful. Boss has people everywhere." Sarah's stomach twisted, her eyes scanning the diner. A man in a leather jacket sat at the counter, his gaze too steady, too focused. She nudged Daniel, her voice low. "We're being watched." He nodded, his jaw tight, and slipped the laptop into her bag. "We need to get this to the press," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "Tonight." Sarah's fingers tightened around the USB, her resolve unshakable. She thought of Noah's laugh, her father's calloused hands, Emma's desperate plea. This wasn't just a fight for justice, it was a fight for family. They slipped out the back door, the diner's bell jingling faintly behind them. Sarah's sneakers crunched on the alley gravel, her heart racing as she glanced over her shoulder. The man from the counter followed, his steps deliberate. Daniel grabbed her hand, his grip firm. "Stay close," he said, his voice a lifeline. They moved fast, the recording burning a hole in Sarah's pocket, a truth too big to hide. Helen and Voss thought they could silence her, but she was ready to make them pay. "You can't hide from this, Helen." Sarah Delgado's voice rang out like a gunshot in the packed community hall, her sneakers planted firmly on the polished floor. The estate board's emergency meeting buzzed with tension, faces turning as she held up the USB drive, its weight heavy with Emma Whitaker's truth. Daniel Whitaker stood beside her, his jaw tight, his fists clenched, ready to back her up. Helen Carver's face twisted, her blonde bob swinging as she shot to her feet, her voice a venomous hiss. "You're a liar, Delgado. That's nothing but a desperate stunt." Sarah's teeth ground together, her pulse hammering as she faced Helen's sneer. The recording from Emma, proof of Helen's theft and collusion with Richard Voss, burned in her pocket. She'd escaped the diner's shadow, the man tailing them left behind in the Chicago night. But the danger wasn't over. Her nails dug into her palms, her resolve like steel. "This isn't a stunt," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "It's your betrayal." She plugged the USB into the projector, her hands steady despite the fire in her chest. The screen flickered, and Emma's voice filled the room, clear and haunting. "Helen's stealing from Noah's charity. She's working with Voss to sell the estate's land." Gasps rippled through the board, their eyes wide. Helen's face drained of color, her hands twitching. "That's fake!" she screamed, but her voice cracked, her panic raw. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "Fake? Like the money you funneled to Voss? Like the lies you told to get me out?" She pulled out the printed spreadsheet, slamming it on the table, each line a nail in Helen's coffin. Daniel's voice boomed, his frame rigid. "You used my son, Helen. You betrayed my wife." His words landed like blows, his eyes burning with a father's fury. Voss stood in the back, his cold smile gone, his suit suddenly too tight. "This is slander," he said, his voice smooth but strained. Sarah cut him off, her voice like a blade. "Slander? We've got bank records, emails, your name on every deal." She pointed to the screen where Emma's email to her lawyer flashed, detailing Helen's scheme and Voss's role. The board erupted, voices shouting, chairs scraping. Helen lunged forward, her face contorted. "You'll regret this, you little—" Daniel stepped between them, his hand raised. "Not another word." His voice silenced the room, his eyes locked on Helen. "You're done?" Sarah's heart pounded, her breath shallow as she watched Helen's empire crumble. The board chair, a stern woman with gray hair, stood. "Ms. Carver, you're suspended pending investigation. Mr. Voss, expect a subpoena." Helen staggered back, her heels clicking, her eyes wild. Voss slipped toward the door, but security blocked him, their faces grim. Sarah's chest heaved, her fingers still gripping the USB. She thought of Noah's laugh, her father's calloused hands, Emma's desperate plea. They'd tried to break her, but she'd broken them instead. Daniel's hand brushed hers, his touch brief but firm. "You did it," he whispered, his voice thick. Sarah nodded, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on the empty screen. The truth was out, but the fight wasn't over. Noah was waiting, and she'd make sure his world stayed safe. "You're finished, Helen, and you know it." Daniel Whitaker's voice thundered across the estate boardroom, his fist slamming the table as Helen Carver's face crumpled. The evidence, Emma's recording, the spreadsheet, the emails, lay bare on the projector, each piece a blade in Helen's empire. Sarah Delgado stood beside him, her jaw clenched, her sneakers rooted to the floor. Her heart pounded, but her eyes burned with triumph. The board's murmurs died as the chairwoman, her gray hair pulled tight, stood. "Ms. Carver, you're under arrest," she said, her voice like steel. Two security guards stepped forward, their hands firm on Helen's arms. Helen's heels scraped the floor, her voice a desperate screech. "You can't do this! I made this estate!" But the guards didn't flinch, hauling her toward the door. Richard Voss, his suit creased, slipped out before anyone could stop him, his cold smile gone. Sarah's nails dug into her palms, her chest heaving as she watched Helen's fall. She thought of Noah, his fragile laugh, and her father Juan, whose job was now safe. The board chair turned to Sarah, her eyes softening. "Miss Delgado, we owe you an apology. Your father's position is secure, with a raise." Daniel's hand brushed Sarah's, his touch brief but steady. "You did this," he said, his voice low, thick with gratitude. Sarah's lips pressed tight, her throat burning. "For Noah," she said, her voice cutting through the room's hush. The chairwoman nodded. "The authorities will handle Voss. This ends here." Sarah's heart slowed, her shoulders easing for the first time in weeks. Justice wasn't just Helen's arrest. It was the board's promise to audit the charity, to restore every dollar stolen from Noah's future. As the guards led Helen away, her eyes locked on Sarah, wild with rage. Sarah didn't flinch, her gaze steady. She'd won, not for herself, but for a boy who needed her, for a father who'd fought for her. The room emptied, but Sarah stood still, the weight of victory settling in her chest. Noah's hum echoed in her mind, a promise of more to come. "You let her steal from Noah, but I'm taking it back." Daniel Whitaker's voice boomed through the Chicago Community Center, his suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up, as he faced a crowd of parents and kids. Sarah Delgado stood nearby, her guitar slung over her shoulder, her jaw tight with quiet pride. Helen Carver's arrest was fresh, the estate board's apology still ringing, but Daniel wasn't stopping there. He clutched a check, his knuckles white, and held it high. "This is for Noah's future and every kid like him." The crowd gasped as he named the amount, $1 million, seed money for a foundation in Emma's name, dedicated to autism support in immigrant families. Sarah's chest tightened, her pulse hammering. She'd fought for Noah, for her father, but this was bigger. Daniel was rewriting his mistakes. She glanced at Noah, sitting cross-legged on a mat, his small hands tapping a rhythm she'd taught him. His eyes flicked to her, a shy smile breaking through. Her nails dug into her palms, not from anger, but from a hope she hadn't dared feel since her mother's death. Daniel turned to her, his voice low. "You're part of this, Sarah. I want you to lead it." Her breath caught, her teeth grinding as she processed his words. "Me?" she said, her voice sharp, almost a challenge. "I'm no expert." Daniel's eyes locked on hers, steady, unwavering. "You reached my son when no one else could. That's enough." The crowd murmured, parents nodding, kids clapping. Sarah's throat burned, thinking of her mother's guitar, Her father's calloused hands, the kids at this center, who needed more than charity. They needed someone who saw them. She stepped forward, her sneakers scuffing the floor, and took the microphone, her hands trembling, but her voice clear. "This isn't just money," she said, her words cutting through the room. "It's a promise. For kids like Noah, who speak in ways we have to learn to hear. For families like mine, who fight to be seen." The crowd erupted, applause shaking the walls. Sarah's heart pounded, her resolve like steel. She wasn't just a janitor's daughter anymore. She was a voice, a force. Daniel joined her, his shoulder brushing hers as he spoke. "I'm funding music and therapy programs here, starting today. And I'm learning sign language, guitar, whatever it takes to be Noah's dad." His voice cracked, raw with honesty. Sarah's lips pressed tight, her eyes stinging as she watched him kneel beside Noah, signing love with clumsy but earnest hands. Noah's fingers mimicked his, slow but sure, and the crowd hushed, moved by the sight. Sarah's chest swelled, her mother's words echoing. Music speaks when words can't. She grabbed her guitar, her fingers flying across the strings, playing a melody her mother taught her, a lullaby that had carried her through grief. Noah swayed, his hands tapping along, and Daniel joined in, his voice low, humming the tune. Parents wiped their eyes, kids clapped, and Sarah's heart raced, not with fear, but with purpose. She thought of Juan, now secure in his job, and the kids at the center who'd have a chance because of this. Daniel's foundation wasn't just redemption. It was a lifeline, a legacy for Emma, for Noah, for her. As the song ended, Sarah set her guitar down, her breath steady. She looked at Daniel, his eyes soft, grateful. "You didn't have to do this," she said, her voice low. He shook his head, his hand brushing Noah's hair. "I did. You showed me how." The crowd dispersed, but Sarah lingered, her sneakers rooted beside Noah. She signed happy to him, and he signed back, his smile wide. The fight with Helen was over, but this was just beginning, a future built on trust and music, stronger than any empire. "You're not just a hero to Noah, you're ours too." The community center director's voice boomed over the microphone, her hands clapping as Sarah Delgado stood in the Chicago hall, her sneakers scuffing the worn floor. The room buzzed with parents, kids, and local reporters, all gathered for the launch of the Emma Whitaker Foundation. Sarah's guitar rested against a chair, its strings silent, but its presence a reminder of the music that had changed everything. Her jaw clenched, her pulse steady, but her chest swelled with a warmth that she hadn't felt since her mother's last lullaby. Noah sat nearby, his small hands tapping a rhythm on his knees, his shy smile lighting the room. Daniel Whitaker stood beside him, his tie loose, his eyes soft but fierce with pride. Sarah stepped to the podium, her breath catching as she faced the crowd. "I'm no hero," she said, her voice clear, cutting like a blade through the applause. "I just showed up for a kid who needed me." Her nails dug into her palms, grounding her as she thought of Noah's laugh, her father Juan's calloused hands, and Emma's note that had sparked this fight. This foundation, it's for kids like Noah, for families like mine. It's about seeing people, really seeing them. The crowd roared, their cheers shaking her bones. She glanced at Noah, signing happy to him, and he signed back, his fingers quick, confident. Daniel joined her, his hand brushing Noah's shoulder. "Sarah taught me something," he said, his voice raw, steady. "Money doesn't fix pain. Listening does." His words landed hard, his eyes locking on Sarah's. "I was lost, after Emma, after everything. But Sarah brought Noah back, and me too." He paused, his throat tight. "This foundation is her vision as much as mine." Sarah's lips pressed into a line, her heart pounding. She hadn't expected this. Daniel's trust, his openness, the way he looked at her like she belonged. The director handed Sarah a framed certificate, an invitation to join the city's education board to design programs for kids with disabilities. Her fingers trembled as she took it, her mind flashing to her mother, Maria, who dreamed of her daughter making a difference. "For you, Mama," she whispered, her voice breaking. Juan stood in the back, his work-worn face beaming, his eyes wet. He clapped, slow and proud, and Sarah's chest ached, her resolve like steel. She'd fought Helen Carver, faced down Richard Voss, and won, not for glory, but for this moment, this family. Noah tugged her sleeve, his small hand signing music. Sarah grinned, her throat burning, and grabbed her guitar. She strummed a melody, soft at first, then bold, the same lullaby her mother had sung. Noah swayed, his hands clapping, and Daniel joined in, his clumsy hum blending with hers. The crowd hushed, some parents wiping their eyes, others signing along with their kids. Sarah's heart raced, not with fear, but with purpose. She saw her mother in Noah's smile, her father in the crowd's pride, and Emma in the foundation's promise. Reporters surged forward, their questions sharp but kind. "Miss Delgado, how does it feel to change a billionaire's life?" one asked. Sarah's eyes flickered, her voice steady. "I didn't change his life. I just reminded him how to live it." Her words silenced the room, her gaze unwavering. Daniel nodded, his hand resting on Noah's shoulder. "She's right," he said, his voice thick. "She reminded me what family means." The reporters scribbled, but Sarah tuned them out, her focus on Noah, who signed love with a grin. Later in the community center's garden, Sarah sat with Noah under a tree, its branches swaying gently. She strummed her guitar, teaching him a new chord, his small fingers fumbling but eager. Daniel joined them, his suit jacket off, his sleeves rolled up. He signed "good job" to Noah, his movements still awkward but earnest. Sarah's lips curved, her heart full. "You're getting it," she said, her voice soft but warm. Daniel's eyes met hers, a silent question in his gaze. "You're staying, right?" he asked, his voice low, vulnerable. Sarah paused, her fingers still on the strings. She thought of her mother's lullaby, her father's pride, Noah's trust. "For him," she said, nodding at Noah, "I'm not going anywhere." Daniel's shoulders eased, his hand brushing hers. Not a claim, but a promise. Noah giggled, his hands signing happy again, and Sarah's chest swelled, her mother's words echoing. "Music speaks when words can't." This wasn't just a job. It was a home, a family forged in fire. The crowd had gone, but the garden hummed with life. Sarah looked at Juan, now laughing with a group of parents, his job secure, his dignity restored. She thought of Helen facing charges and Voss running from subpoenas. They'd tried to break her, but she'd built something stronger. A reporter lingered, snapping a photo of Sarah, Noah, and Daniel under the tree, their smiles bright, unguarded. Later, that photo would sit on Daniel's desk, framed with the words, "Family is where the heart listens." Sarah's sneakers scuffed the grass as she played one last note. Her eyes on Noah's joy, her heart steady. She'd fought for this, and it was enough. The lesson wasn't shouted, it was lived. Sarah's fight had shown that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's showing up, staying, and listening to the silence others ignore. Her mother's guitar, Noah's laugh, Daniel's clumsy signs. They were proof that love could rebuild what pain had torn apart. As the sun dipped low, Sarah's fingers stilled, her breath calm. Noah leaned against her, his small hand in hers, and Daniel's gaze held a quiet vow. They weren't just a family, they were a promise, one that no one could break. Sarah Delgado showed us that justice isn't always loud. It's showing up, listening, and fighting for those who can't. Her courage turned a billionaire's grief into hope, proving family is built on trust, not blood. If Sarah and Noah's story moved you, drop a comment below. Share your thoughts or a moment when someone's kindness changed your world. Where are you watching from, and what's your story? Your voice matters. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Your support keeps these stories alive. Hit subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one, where another heart might just find its home.